includes but is not limited to impacts on small business in the plastic production industry, including the impact to jobs and the impacts on human health and the environment. And I think one of the things that would be useful to learn about to achieve this is how the bill would impact the management of plastics and other waste. And I just say this because the management of waste and plastics will impact the plastic production industry, it'll impact jobs, it'll impact human health, and it'll have environmental impact, et cetera. And so currently, in my view, we don't have adequate expertise or a lot of expertise from the waste processing sector. And I just thought it'd be helpful to have someone, so I want to recommend someone, Chair, for that, if I may.
Yes, absolutely.
So the person I wanted to recommend is Norman Lee. He is the Director of Waste Management at the region of Peel. So in the region of Peel, he's responsible for managing about 500,000 tons of waste per year in Peel. And Peel, for those of you who aren't from sort of this part of the country, encompasses Brampton, Mississauga, and Caledon. So it's about 1.5 million residents. And so he's also a director and past chair of the Ontario Waste Management Association Board of Directors, has 30 years of experience planning, building, and operating waste management and diversion facilities. He spent the first 11 years of his career in the private sector as a consulting engineer, specializing in the design, approval, and construction of waste management facilities. Norm then switched to the public sector, and he spent 10 years at the City of Toronto before becoming Director of Waste Management in Peel in 2009. He's a member of many professional and industry associations. And so I just think he could provide like objective insight, but also inform our study and help us to clarify what we hear from other witnesses in the early meeting. So, I just wanted to offer that just to enhance the study.
Did you submit his name previously, Mr. Baker?
I did, yeah.
So my question to the analyst would be, obviously, yes.
Yeah, before decisions are made, I'd like to get an intervention here.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But I just have a question for the analysts. Would that individual, I mean, I know that the analysts have a kind of ranking that they use to put together these panels. They have a first ranking, and then is this gentleman, I forget his name, Mr. Baker, but was he ranked fourth or fifth? The analysts are aware of this suggested witness?
I don't know. I mean, if I made the mistake, it's on my end. I'm sorry if I didn't.
Sorry, I'm asking the analyst. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know which of the analysts.
Mr. Chair, if I could just intercede just briefly before they answer that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I do apologize, Mr. Chair, but this is one of the reasons why usually when we do consideration of witnesses, we do them in camera. Because we all may have very reputable people, but it's up to individual parties to kind of rank their priorities. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to make it sound like someone as thoughtful as this gentleman is was ranked low priority by anyone. I think if we start getting into who is a priority and whatnot, and to be fair to all of those that have participated, we were given a timeline to submit witnesses. And again, this is on the committee's report. So, if Mr. Baker wants to amend and put that forward, I just would say it'd be a little bit outside the process that we've established. And again, it's for reputational concerns that we don't want to be saying who's high priority, who's low priority.
No, I didn't mean it in pejorative terms. I just meant that there's a system that they use. But anyway, what I'll do is I will bring it up with the analysts offline. But if you've submitted the name, then the name is in the pool that is being considered. So we'll take note that you believe this individual would be a good witness. Mr. Albus, do you have your name up, your hand up for something else?
Yeah, no, just on that, I was going to say that if there are going to be any changes, that there should be a motion that's brought forward to it. And in fact, I would just suggest that while I have the floor, that I move that we receive the report. And then if someone wants to make an amendment to it, Mr. Chair, then you can go to that, just so we're in order.
The only thing I would say to that is in practical reality, for example, when we were setting up the panels for the SEPA study, there's last minute changes that need to be made, or else we're you know, we can't have a meeting, because so if I have to go back every time we change a witness, you know, we're never going to get anywhere. So what I would ask is that you just, you know, give me some leeway, and I'll try and do my best. And you know, uh, as I say, sometimes we have to reorder witnesses at the last minute, and if we have to go back to the committee for a motion each time we do that.
No, Mr. Chair, I'm not asking for that at all. What I'm simply suggesting, though, we need to start with the basis of what's there, and quite honestly, it's up to Mr. Baker and his party to submit a certain priority list, and who those are. And if someone cannot make it, then it would go to the next person. That's in the principle of fairness. But to be fair, we should not be having these discussions as to who is a high priority or low priority. I just think that it's better done behind closed doors.
That's not what I'm trying to do. But what I'm trying to say is there's some juggling that needs to happen. Mr. Baker, I believe, has submitted this name, and many other names have been submitted. And so I'll juggle to the best of my abilities based on, you know, input that we've received at steering committee and other requests. So, but do you have something else, Mr. Albus, other than this?
No, I moved. Okay. I moved that we received the report, so we can debate it, or Adam, if Mr. Baker wants to make an amendment, he can do that.
Yeah, Mr. Longfield, you had your hand up though. Mr. Longfield.
I was just in agreement with Mr. Albus that maybe we could vote on.
Okay. So is there a consensus? Do we need a roll call vote, or is there a consensus to adopt the steering committee report? Madame Posé? Vous êtes en sourdine. Madame Posé? No, c'est bon. So there seems to be consensus. So we'll adopt the report. I would just like to draw your attention to 3 deadlines for submitting witness names for future work, future studies. We need suggested witnesses for the meeting on Bill C-204 by February 24th. That was agreed to. That's in the report. And by February 22nd, we would need witnesses from all the parties for the meeting we're having on the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. And by March 31st, we're asking for witnesses, suggested witnesses from each party for the M34 study on freshwater. So I just wanted to highlight those, but as I understand that the report is adopted. Mr. Longfield?
Yeah, for the next part of the business, I'd like to move that we, I put a motion in, a notice of motion. The sub-Cs were tabled
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
This morning. So I'd like to table the motion that I submitted before the meeting.
Just a second. Mr. Albus, point of order.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly fair for someone to table something at any point, but right now the business of the committee is on it, and we did not necessarily have a vote or unanimous consent. So I'd like at least to take care of that business before we decide to go to other business.
Sorry, what business are you referring to?
I heard the chair say that we had unanimous consent on the
Well, he didn't ask for unanimous consent. He just asked a question.
Do we have unanimous consent? Yeah, I believe we do.
Okay, in that case, then it would be helpful to say that's cleared, then we can go to the next item.
I appreciate that. Okay, no, you make a good point.
So would you like me to read my motion?
Yes, please, Mr. Longfield.
It's being circulated in both official languages, that pursuant to Standing Order 81.5 and the order of reference of Tuesday, February 16th, 2021, that the committee considered supplementary estimate C before the end of the current supply period, and the committee invite the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to appear in view of this study, and that the deputy heads of the minister's portfolio implicated in the supplementary estimate C appear alongside the minister, and that the minister appear for the first hour with the deputy heads remaining at the table for the entirety of the scheduled time.
Est-ce que il y a des intervenants qui veulent s'adresser à cette motion? J'ai Monsieur Albas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just simply ask the question of Mr. Longfield in his motion. You know, I've remarked in previous meetings of the desire to hold the deputy minister, who is a statutory responsibility to answer questions to Parliament in her capacity as a accounting officer. It seems that in this they're using language of deputy heads. Can the member please indicate whether or not that includes the deputy minister, yes or no?
Yeah, I'm using that interchangeably. Deputy minister, those are the financial officers that would be reporting to us. We missed them last time, so I wanted to make sure we had them this time for the second hour.
If I could please make, if I have the floor, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I would like to make just a formal amendment that the deputy heads, including the deputy minister, just so that it is abundantly clear.
Okay.
Yeah, I consider that friendly. I mean,
okay,
that's what I was
everyone's okay
indicating.
with that amendment? Okay, everyone's okay with the motion? Perfect. Motion's adopted.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Mr. Saini. Mr. Saini's hand is up.
I would like to also introduce a motion.
Okay.
The motion is that the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development conduct a review of eliminating food waste from all points of the supply chain, from producer to distributor, retailer, restaurant, and customer, that the study include an examination of the root causes of food waste in the supply chain, identify and assess existing solutions developed in Canada, and include best policy practices from other countries, that this study be conducted over 6 meetings and the results reported back to the House of Commons.
Okay, so Mr. Saini has moved a motion. Does anyone want to debate the motion? Mr. Albert.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in regards to this, is this I'd like the Liberal Party, if someone to clarify if the intention is to have this studied instead of M34 as the first study of the Liberal Party in our cycle of Bloc, New Democrat, Conservative, and Liberal.
Wait, okay.
I'm just asking for clarification if that's there, or if this is just because it's my understanding he's already tabled through notice of motion previously. So I'm just looking for some clarification.
Okay, so
can I speak to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Albas, as you can appreciate, M34 was sent by the House, just like Bill, I believe it's C206 or 288 was sent from the House. So those are two separate things. This is a Liberal Party motion, just like the other parties have put in their other motions, but the other two studies that refer to, they are from the House, not from a particular political party.
Okay, I'm having trouble with this screen here. I have Mr. Longfield, Ms. Collins, and Mr. Albas again, I guess. Yeah.
I think Ms. Collins was up before me.
Okay, you were up and then you were down, and okay. Anyway, Ms. Collins, Mr. Longfield, Mr. Albas.
Just a point of clarification about the study. The M34 is directing the committee to do a study, and it was my understanding, in order to get support from other parties, that there was an agreement that would be either this round of Liberal studies or the next round, that it wouldn't take precedence over other studies. I think the difference between that and actual legislation that's being passed, should be clear.
Okay, Mr. Longfield.
Yeah, I think in terms of process, we had a notice of motion, but I don't think we actually adopted the motion from Mr. Saini. And in terms of studies coming to us, I mean, it coincidentally came from a member of the committee through the House, but it still came to us through the House. So I think at this point, it's adopting the motion and getting it onto our schedule would be something that we could be working on in the subcommittee.
So you would view that as a separate issue. Okay, Mr. Albas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just when we had discussions about so first of all, as a member of this committee, you could have brought this motion, your M34, to the committee. And I don't want to dive too deeply into the conversations that were had, but it was always my understanding that the Liberal Party would either choose to do yours, and you made a public argument, you made an argument that you should have more meetings than what other parties are asking for. For example, I think we said, between 4 to 6 meetings.
Yeah, we negotiated
and whatnot. Yeah. And so and again, to be fair, Mr. Longfield may have not have been there, and neither was Mr. Saney. But that was something that we came up together. So I would like just to ask the question here, because the timing of M34 has no timing on it. And it's really up to Liberal members to decide, do they want between 4 meetings or more on Mr. Saney's motion for us to study? Or do we want to have M34 come forward, which has 7? So I've always put it to Liberals to decide what they want to do. But the question would be, we should know that so that we can plan that, because it seems to me, Mr. Chair, that by agreeing onto the subcommittee report, the steering committee report today, we've actually indicated that we would like to have witnesses go through a process for for M34. So we need a little clarification as to who's on first. Are we going to be going to M34, where we've actually agreed as a committee we will open up a process for witnesses, or are we going to do Mr. Sage? Now, if we just want to have a vote on this, and that's going to be the Liberals' next study after M34, that's fine. But I would just ask Liberal members to decide which one.
Longfield is getting at is that they're 2 separate, and you're right. The steering committee report mentions M34, but Mr. Longfield's point is the substance of the motion and not the scheduling of it.
Well, I'm fine if this is what the Liberals want, but I just need to know from Liberal members, which one are you going to do so we can schedule this?
Well, that's something for the steering committee, I guess. Mr. Longfield?
Yeah, I was just going to say that getting it onto our docket so that the steering committee can deal with it. We do have a call for witness lists by the end of March. We'll see what the next weeks bring us. We're also, have sub-Cs that'll be coming up. We have possibly C12 coming to us. So we will have a scheduling. We have a traffic jam in front of us, I think is the way I put it in previous meetings, and we have to figure our way through that. But to get it at least tabled so that we know that's a motion that the committee has accepted, and then we can figure out the scheduling from there.
And just to clarify, Mr. Albus, there is a time limit on M34. But so, do we want to continue to debate the substance of Mr. Saney's motion, or does anyone want to speak to it? Mr. Saney, you've spoken to it already, I guess.
Well, I think the purpose of my motion actually is really to bring together, a process that actually affects all of us. It's not a motion that was meant to be partisan or to seclude or to divide in any way. The motion was that because of the food loss study, to see what would emerge, and just some data that right now that I have in front of me, that we're pretty well wasting 13 million tons of food is wasted every year in Canada. That's 396 kilos per capita, and that this process contributes to almost 56.5 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions in Canada. And if you want to compare that, that's roughly equal to the annual emissions of about 12 million cars. The other stuff that's on sort of more of on the more personal side is that the amount of food that we waste could feed almost 24 million Canadians a year. So this was an issue that I felt that would bring us all together in a way, because we all represent diverse parts of the country, but we all have dealing with some of the similar issues. And I thought that this would be a way to sort of talk about things in a more in a more succinct manner, because this has been brought to the media and other things. So I think for our committee, in a way of doing this in a manner which kind of brings all our diverse regions together, but we could do this in a way that would be nonpartisan, but would be really, I think, good for the country, whether we talk about the economy, agriculture, poverty. I think food loss is something that we should really focus on, and I look for the support of this motion.
Mr. Albus?
Yeah, so just on this, look, I'm okay with the Liberal Party deciding that it wants to study this particular subject. The question I just had was, when is it going to happen? And no one's been able to say that. Now, to be fair, Mr. Chair, you've said, well, maybe the steering committee can look at that. That's fine. I just would ask that the Liberals would work with their vice chair and with their chair, and just figure out which direction we're rowing in. Because quite frankly, if they want to say we're going to do M34 as our study, then we restart the cycle. It's a block study, an NDP study, a conservative study, and then we'll see Mr. Sani's food waste. That's fine with me. I'm completely fine with that. I just really would like to say it'd be really helpful if members would talk to one another and figure these things out.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Shifke, you're on mute, I think. Mr. Shifke? Mr. Shifke? No? You're on mute now. We seem to be having technical problems. I don't know if...
I would suggest unplugging and replugging in your...
I'm not in the room. I don't know if the clerk is speaking with...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can indeed. So Mr. Albus's
Congratulations.
trick was fruitful. Go ahead, Mr. Shifke.
No, I just unplugged it and put it back in. No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to just say that, I fully support this. I think this is something that all of us can get behind. It's a bipartisan issue. We're all looking at reducing waste. We're all looking at ways that we can reduce our environmental impact. This, as Mr. Saini had pointed out, touches on farmers, touches on the economies of families. It's something that I think that we should definitely look at. And if it's just a question as to where this is going to fall in our timeline, I have full confidence in the steering committee to be able to.
No, we've lost you again.
Longfield is right. We definitely have a traffic jam coming. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. So my little screen here shows Ms. Sachs, Ms. Collins, Mr. Albus. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to add in terms of agreeing and supporting in doing this study, a lot of the conversation, especially in the last 10 months, particularly in the urban center that I'm in, is food insecurity in relation to food waste. And, it's really a timely issue for us to be looking, as my colleague, Mr. Saini, had mentioned, that we're really looking at the whole chain of how it's impacting our communities. And there are certainly many models that we can look at, but starting from agriculture and moving through to food provision and how we make sure there isn't waste, and that we're also addressing food insecurity and food disparity is really something that we should be looking at Canada-wide and in our perspective of this, and also the impacts of waste as we go forward. So, I really think we should be making this a priority, and it's an important conversation to have now.
Mr. Shifke and Ms. I don't have control over, I can't take somebody's hand down. So if you've spoken and could you just take, Mr. Shifke, can you put your virtual hand down? Yeah, Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins?
I just wanted to clarify the number of meetings. I just didn't hear when Mr. Saini was reading out his motion. Was it 4 or was it 8 that was being proposed? I know 6.
Yeah, that's what I see. Oh wait, no, it is
6. Sorry, 6. They had muted me, so I'm sorry. 6.
Because in the original motion it was 8. So
right.
6 now. Okay.
6 now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Albus.
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask to see if the timelines had changed. What we had said originally is that we should all try to aim for 4 meetings, and then up to 6 could be argued as to the reason why. And so I would ask Mr. Saini that if he could explain why we would need 6 meetings, because again, we do have a lot of potential legislation that will be coming to the committee. And again, I have full faith in the process moving forward. But just dealing with these things, I would just like to have it where if perhaps there was a little bit more dialogue with between the vice chairs as to when these things are happening. But I'm fine to see this progress. I'd like to hear an explanation to go to 6, because I really think that this is more 4 or maybe 5 at best.
Okay, so we'll go to Madame Posé, and then I guess Mr. Saini, do you want to address that, Mr. Albus's question?
Yes,
After,
no,
can we do it?
Okay,
Yeah.
yes,
I'm
after.
trying to maintain some order. Oui, Madame Posé, c'est à votre tour. Madame Posé.
Oui, voilà.
Yes. Excuse me. 6 meetings or 4 meetings. The motion is so broad in scope. Excuse me, I'm coughing slightly here. Forgive me. So the motion is broad in nature. I think it would be interesting to try to narrow it down. I certainly agree with Mr. Albus. We have so many things in the pipeline. So why 6? I'm asking that question too. We were also trying to see if we could have some meetings during the break weeks. Have we moved forward on that? Yes, indeed. We are working on holding meetings during some of the break weeks. I don't have a full answer on that yet, but yes, indeed, that's one of our aims at present. Mr. Saini, would you like to respond to these questions?
Appreciate Mr. Albus's intervention. I think it's important. When I had initially thought of this study, I had reached out to a lot of people, and the information and the volume of information that I received from them, I felt that at that time it was 8, and then I realized, over the last few weeks of the committee meeting, I just feel that this is something that touches on a lot of parts of the country, on a lot of different files, on a different issues, and I thought, well, 8 maybe would have been, initially when I put it through, but I realized also that there was a traffic jam. So if Mr. Albus, and I appreciate your comments, Mr. Albus, and I appreciate where you're coming from, but if I would take your friendly amendment to take it to 5, if that makes you feel comfortable.
Okay, does Mr. Albus want to propose that?
Well, if it's helpful to the conversation to move it forward, but it seems that Mr. Saini is trying to work together. So if there's unanimous consent, I'm fine with that change to 5.
Okay.
That's quite gracious of them.
Okay, so should we vote on this? Would somebody like to call the vote on this motion? Ms. Collins?
I'll call the vote.
Okay, well, Ms. Collins called it, but Mr. Longfield did as well. So let's vote. How do we proceed, clerk? Everyone says the yea or nay?
We can do a roll call, or we can say it was agreed to. If everyone agrees to,
Okay.
I can just reflect that in the.
Okay, it was agreed to. Okay, so it seems to have been agreed to. There is no objection to that idea. Okay, good. So so that seems to be it for the motions, I believe, which brings us to the draft of the ZEV study.
For that, Mr. Chair, we should be going in camera.
That's right.
So
yeah,
I'd ask everybody to leave this meeting, and then click on the link for the in-camera Zoom meeting.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll see everybody on the other side, I guess.
you.